What's up, everybody? It's your boy Al. Just chilling here in Houston, Texas. Want to talk about, I've thought about it for a little while, the comments Drew Brees made about he's not for people disrespecting the anthem. First of all, I do believe that he has a right to his opinion. I do believe his opinion is a little skewed and a little bit selfish. And let me tell you why. When Drew was asked about the kneeling during the national anthem, he said that he's not for people disrespecting the flag, and immediately the justification that he went to was his two grandfathers. He mentioned immediately. I had two grandfathers that served in World War II. When I think about the national anthem, I immediately think about them. Well, therein lies part of the problem. Not to say, Drew, that you're not supposed to think about your grandfathers that served in World War II, but I think you cannot limit your thinking when it comes to the national anthem to thoughts that make you comfortable. It's hard for me to understand how, in this climate, when you say you hear the national anthem, all you think about, or immediately what you think about, are your two grandfathers who served in World War II. So you mean to tell me that with all this going on, you can't think of anything outside of your thoughts of comfort, your thoughts of your grandfather's heroism? You can't see black men being choked out, police brutality. You can't see financial inequality. You can't see all the issues that we're having with the COVID-19. You can't think of anything else that's going on in the world or in history other than your grandfathers when it comes to you hearing the national anthem and seeing the flag. My challenge to Drew Brees is to challenge yourself to think outside of more than just what makes you comfortable. And that's to anybody. Challenge yourself to think outside of more than what makes you comfortable or what makes something relevant or irrelevant to you. I challenge Drew Brees to not just think about your grandfathers, but think about Anthony Johnson, better known as Anthony the Negro, who was the first free black man in America after he served the indentured servitude, who was set free and given land by his former masters, became independently wealthy with his own land, his own indentured service himself. Unfortunately, had his own black slave, which I do not really cut for. But this man had his own wealth after he was set free, and basically his master set what should have been the blueprint for slavery in America. He set the blueprint for me. He set his slave free after he served a certain amount of time, and gave him land, made him his neighbor, and let him begin to amass his own wealth. Could you imagine a land, America, where that happened? Could you imagine an America where after slavery, masters would set their slaves free, let them acquire some of the land they worked on, build homes, and we just exist as one great community? I kind of touched on that in my last video, but I mean that's something to behold. But this man did that. Anthony Johnson, Anthony the Negro, was set free by his master, given land. His family became wealthy, and his land was taken from him because the people in this country said that Anthony is not a citizen. He's not an American. He is African slaves were considered aliens. So everything was taken from him when he died. None of his property was left, so he was divided up among white men. So I need you to think about stuff like that when you're thinking about the national anthem and the American flag. I also need you to think of not just your two grandfathers who were World War II veterans, but I also need you to think of a man named Isaac Woodard. Isaac Woodard was a World War II veteran who was returning home from war, honorably discharged, in his uniform, proud to serve his country. And immediately, as soon as he gets back, as a matter of fact, as he's on the bus ride home from serving in World War II, gets two cops called on him by the bus driver because he had an attitude that Anthony asked to stop and use the restroom, which he had every right to do after serving in World War II. It's the least you could do is let the man use the restroom. The next bus stop, the bus driver called the police on Isaac. They brutally beat him, took him to the jail, beat him even more, and then put both of his eyes out, beat him and gouged his eyes out because he said yes and not yes, sir. This man lived the rest of his life blind. Here's a man who served in World War II, came home and immediately was brutalized and blinded for the rest of his life. What a reward. to serve your country proudly, to come home only to be blinded. I need Drew to not just think about his grandfather and not just think about Isaac, but think about a lot of the other World War II vets who were black, who came home and were treated worse than they were before going off to war. I need Drew to also think about some of the people in the Revolutionary War who were black citizens, who were black slaves, who were promised citizenship after slavery if they performed well in World War II. If they fought for America, they were promised to be set free, only to fight gallantly in World War II and to be returned right back to slavery. Think about some of the black slaves who refused to fight for the United States and fought for the British instead. They said that they'd rather fight for the British and down the battlefield fighting for the British than to return to slavery in the United States of America. That lets you know how bad slavery was in the United States of America. I need Drew to not just think about that, but I need him to also think about the black independent communities like Black Wall Street, where black men of World War I pulled themselves up by the bootstraps, as we're always challenged to do by some constituents of white America. Pulled themselves up by the bootstraps, had their own communities with their own neighborhoods, their own churches, their own banks, and they weren't begging for a handout. They weren't committing crimes or doing anything like that. But the city was burned to the ground because of the lie of, once again, and it started way back then, white woman who said she was touched on an elevator. Turns out she wasn't, but she said that statement, and that city, that community was burned to the ground. Come to find out, Black Wall Street was just one of many black thriving communities in the early 1900s that was burned to the ground. You also need to think about the 17th president of the United States, who was supposed to be a patriot, but Andrew Johnson. Think about him when you're hearing the national anthem. The man who, after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, Lincoln started what we now know as 40 acres and a mule. You hear black people talk about 40 acres and a mule all the time. What that was a law that after slaves were freed, they would get to own and possess some of the land that they worked on for many years. And Abraham Lincoln had already set it in motion. There were some black former slaves who were starting to work and cultivate their own land that they had been granted by President Lincoln, starting their lives. When President Lincoln was assassinated, President Andrew Johnson took back everything that President Lincoln had given out and made the statement that's on record: as long as I'm alive, a white man will always run this country. Setting in motion what we now know historically as one of the darkest times in our country, which was the Jim Crow movement. Andrew Johnson is considered the father of the Jim Crow movement, and as bad as Donald Trump is to some, is considered the worst president in United States history. So what I need for people like Drew Brees to do is I need you to think outside of what makes you comfortable and think a little bit about what makes you uncomfortable. Think a little bit about things outside of your immediate situation or your immediate family or your immediate bloodline when it comes to the national anthem, Star Spangled Banner, and the American flag. And see that there's so many problems. There's so many things that are great, but there's so many things that are broken. I need you to be able to see that and understand why it's okay for these guys to take a knee. As a matter of fact, Drew Brees has a viral picture of him taking a knee, doing the anthem with his teammates. Things have gotten worse. So I need people like Drew to open his eyes, see outside of his immediate situation. You know, that's part of human nature, to always try to connect ourselves to things, to be able to identify what's going on. I remember when Ray Rice knocked out his wife in the elevator, and they were having a roundtable discussion on ESPN. I think it was on the morning talk show First Take, and I think they had a bunch of guys subbing in for Stephen A, and I think Skip was still on at the time. And the mediator said, I tell you what, guys, you take the face of Ray Rice's girlfriend and replace it with your mother or your sister or your daughter. Imagine that's them. And now tell me how you feel. Which you could do that, or as John Oliver said, you could put away your magical face switching machine and see the incident as it actually happened. Don't imagine that it's your mother. Don't imagine that it's your sister. Don't imagine that it's your Aunt Lulabelle or your grandmother, whoever. See who it actually happened to and care about that as it actually is. Too many times we feel like we have to remove the person who was in an incident and replace it with somebody that we care about to even care. And a lot of times that's what we do to justify standing for something we shouldn't stand for or standing against something that we possibly should stand for. Drew Brees has inserted the face of his grandfathers to justify not disrespecting the flag and not disrespecting the national anthem, when Drew needs to remove the faces of his fathers and replace them with some of the black men, women, boys, and girls who've been wronged in this country. And then tell me how he feels about disrespecting the flag or kneeling for the national anthem. Again, I love living in America, wouldn't want to live anywhere else, but we have so many things that are broken. We have so many things that are wrong. And until we all step out of our comfort zone and start dealing with things that are uncomfortable for us to deal with and start seeing things through uncomfortable lenses, this country will never get better. Don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to me. I'm going to be starting another channel for those who like to talk to me about music and rap, and also boxing, which is my passion. I'm a former boxer, so I will be starting that YouTube channel, so be on the lookout for that. Holla at y'all later. Peace.